Resident Evil 3. Is it better than Resident Evil 2? The answer to that is both yes and no. It's a different type of game. The claustrophobic terror has been replaced with an action focus. Here's a good analogy that sums the review up. If Resident Evil 2 is Alien, Resident Evil 3 Remake is Aliens. Resident Evil 3 is very cinematic. It has the explosive machismo of a 90s summer popcorn flick, complete with one-liners, ridiculous over-the-top moments, and sequences. In one scene, Jill revs up a muscle car on the top of a roof and smashes into Nemesis, flying off the edge and crashing to the ground. She's not hurt, of course, and she just shrugs it off. Jill seems like an invincible superhero in RE3. The game sets her up like a comic book heroine, a kind of zombie survival Wonder Woman with Superman's invincibility. There's plenty of parallels to other adventure heroes like Indiana Jones and Lara Croft. Throughout the game, Jill constantly defies death. She gets shot with a rocket launcher, falls multiple times from bone-jarring heights, nearly incinerated and almost crushed by a car, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And my favorite scene of the game, Jill is almost pulverized by a giant rolling head. It's amazing. Carlos is likewise as skilled. The characters are always pulling off impossible feats of true grit and finesse. Carlos fires off that perfect shot at the gas tanker and explodes at just the right moment, movie style. Carlos and Jill are quite the dynamic duo. Those are the kinds of things that you'll see in the game. It's a lot less serious than RE2. In a very real sense, Resident Evil 3 Remake feels more like a grindhouse film than it does like a macabre horror movie. It's not meant to really shock or scare you. It's meant to thrill, meant to dazzle with explosions and excitement. It's meant to keep you engaged, and it actually does a good job. There's a playfulness about the game, as if it doesn't want to take itself too seriously. Resident Evil 3 dispels the believability and breaks the boundaries of video game mentality to create something that's more purely enjoyable than it is purely scary. But Resident Evil 3 is all the better for it. The blazing action movie style makes for a more condensed, more memorable Resident Evil game. I was able to beat the game in about 4.5 hours, but those 4.5 hours were very ridiculous, absurd, and sometimes pretty frightening. It feels like a homage to 80s and 90s classics. The blueprint is there. One-liners, quips, radical explosive sequences, the nefarious bad guy complemented by the big bad. All these forces are at play to create a kind of hurricane of a game. I can honestly say this is among my favorite REs because of it. Resident Evil 3 Remake feels like an experience rather than just a game. It's still very much a Resident Evil game though. There's the dark and creepy moments, the puzzles, the indirect layered level design, the hunter gammas and betas, brain-chewing zombie jump scares, it's all there. The action moments don't actually betray the terrifying formula we know and love. If anything, they actually amplify the formula. RE3 is built around duality. Carlos is the yin to Jill's yang. Jill is definitely the more masculine of the two. Carlos' segments are dark, eerie, and put emphasis on survival. Jill's segments are more over the top, fun, and chaotic. These characters and their stories are two different halves of the same whole, and have a much more unique dynamic than Claire and Leon. RE3 keeps things fresh. There's horror that cycles into ridiculously hammy action sequences, which cycle back towards the twisted, burning ruins of Raccoon City. The game doesn't sit in one place for too long, and it's actually pretty refreshing. The action focus makes the game feel less dire though. The tension is still there in Carlos' segments, especially near the end when you have to defend against hordes of zombies, but playing as Jill, I never really was afraid of anything. Her bluster, her swagger, her devil-may-care attitude made me see her as a victor and not a victim. But a lot of that have to do with Nemesis. Nemesis is not very threatening. He's no Mr. X, and honestly I think that's okay. Some say Nemesis is just a nuisance, but I love when he shows up because it's something crazy always happens. Nemesis showing up is the equivalent of a bad guy speeding away from our hero, kicking off an epic car chase. Nemesis is the gateway to hilarious and memorable sequences that really define the game. It's clear Capcom wanted RE3 to be more mainstream and accessible to everyday consumers, but they still delivered where it counts. The freaky body horror, spine-tingling undead monstrosities, the deep unsettling lore are all present, but action steals the show. Resident Evil 3's animations are absolutely incredible. Capcom is making amazing progress with its RE engine, and its artists have created something special here. The game is constantly seamlessly flowing in and out of gameplay sequences like butter, reinforcing that cinematic movie feel. Jill's expressions are nuanced and extremely realistic. She goes through an entire spectrum of facial expressions in the game. We can tell when she's mad, when she's afraid, when she's confident. That smirk always follows a snappy one-liner. Carlos's hair flows and sways as if caught by a constant unseen breeze. Other characters like Nikolai are immaculately detailed, as with minor characters like Kendo or Marvin, who show apprehension and pain in equal measures. The characters' expressions speak volumes and really make you forget that you're playing a game.
Brad! Here they come!
In here!
No, I don't.
Are we still a team?
Always.
Then do me a favor.
Resident Evil 3's environments are likewise incredible. Jill gets to explore the ruined Raccoon City, whose bright and colorful neon signs clash with the visceral mayhem that surrounds it. The sheer level of detail that went into Raccoon City is staggering. Cars are smashed every which way. The roads are utterly demolished. There's blood, guts, and body parts everywhere. Fires blaze. Ghostly buildings stare ominously down at the undead city. The moon hangs in gray clouds while fog rolls on the cobblestones. The lighting is immaculate. From reflections to ambient fog and particle effects, the scenes and areas are always captivating. The city feels so alive even if it's completely dead. The environments themselves tell a story without saying anything. The interiors are just as unnerving as Resident Evil 2, but lose some of their power without the constant tension. Capcom's clever use of lighting and shadow suffuses players in a blanket of creepiness. The environments are foreboding and contrast well with the explosive action. Resident Evil 3 is a great game, but it's not the game that you might expect. It's more like a horror film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger than it is a Wes Craven flick. Action is in the driver's seat and horror is in the back seat. How much you enjoy Resident Evil 3 depends on what kind of game you want. It's not completely authentic to the original game. There's lots of things missing, like the Gravedigger boss and the giant spiders. If you want something just like Resident Evil 2 Remake, or a total faithful recreation of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, then this game could disappoint you. But if you want something a little different, something shorter and more cinematic, definitely pick the game up. I personally love the game and confidently give it an 85 out of 100. Capcom is at the top of their game here. The animations are fantastic, the combat is smooth. Things are a little too fast, things are a little too short, about 4.5 hours, but ultimately the game does deliver a fantastic and memorable experience.